The sound reached me before any messenger did. It came up through the stone floor of my chamber, through the soles of my boots, a low vibration that was not quite sound and not quite silence. Aldrath, crying out in the wolf pen below the east tower. I had been awake already. I had been awake for 4 nights running, ever since my healers brought me the news that the wound in his left shoulder, the one taken in the Greymore raid 3 weeks past, had turned foul in ways none of them had words for. Aldrath was the oldest wolf in Ironmere. He had been bonded to my bloodline since before my grandfather was born. I had grown up pressed against his flank on cold mornings, listening to the slow thunder of his heartbeat. And now that heartbeat was wrong, too fast, too shallow, and every healer I sent into his pen came out bleeding. 3 of them. 3 of the finest wolf healers in the Northern Ridge territories, and every one of them had backed against the pen wall within minutes of entering, and been fortunate to reach the latch before Aldrath's teeth found them. Marin, my head healer, a woman of 30 years' experience who had sewn shut wounds that would have felled a lesser creature, had come to me after her own failed attempt with a cloth pressed to the gash on her forearm, and told me, with the flat steadiness of someone who has stopped arguing with the truth, that the fever had taken something from his mind, that he was not the wolf I knew, that I should begin to consider what it meant to let him go with dignity, before the madness finished what the wound had started. I had not answered her. I had gone to the pen myself, stood at the iron bars and watched him pace, this great silver animal built like a cliff face given breath, moving in tight, anguished circles, his eyes carrying a light that was wrong, too bright, too hot, the light of a fire burning through the things it was supposed to protect. He had known me. I was certain of it. For one moment, as I gripped the bars, he had stopped and turned his great head toward me, and there was something in his gaze that was almost sorrow, almost recognition. Then the fever swallowed it again and he had swung away. I did not sleep that night, or the one after. On the 5th morning, my chamberlain Oswin came to me with a name. He held it carefully, the way a man holds something he expects to be thrown back at him. "There is a healer," he said. "From the border settlements, Fenwick Crossing or beyond it, she travels. The border packs use her for the animals the regular healers cannot reach. She has a way with the ones that have gone difficult. That is the word they use, difficult." "Difficult," I repeated. "The account I have is from the Greymore pack's own warden. He says she brought back 2 dogs that were thought too far gone, fever cases, both of them and both showing the kind of aggression that generally means the end. He says she did not use anything he recognized as medicine. She spoke to them, and he paused. He says they listened." I looked at him for a moment. Oswin was not a man who embellished. "Send for her." "My lord, she is." He paused again, the particular pause that means the next words are going to require delicacy. "She carries no pack affiliation. She is what the border settlements call wolfless born. No wolf of her own. Some of the council will. Send for her, Oswin." She arrived the following evening. I watched from the upper window of the east tower as the escort rode in through the citadel gate, 2 of my riders, and between them, a woman on a dun-colored horse that was clearly her own animal and clearly unhurried about the pace everyone around it wanted to keep. She was not what I had been picturing, though I could not have said precisely what I had been picturing. She was slight, dressed for travel in a worn brown cloak, the kind of cloak that has been mended so many times it stops being any particular shape and simply becomes itself. She carried a satchel on her back. When she dismounted in the courtyard below, she moved the way a person moves when they are accustomed to arriving in places where no one is especially glad to see them. Not defensively, not anxiously, but with a certain quiet economy, as if she had learned long ago not to waste motion on things that were not yet certain. Marin met her in the courtyard. I could not hear the exchange from the tower window, but I could read it well enough. Marin was a tall woman, and she had a way of drawing herself up when she was not impressed that communicated the fact without requiring words. She stood that way now. The healer Senna, Oswin had told me her name, was listened with her head slightly inclined, the satchel on her back, and when Marin finished whatever she had said, Senna replied briefly, nodded once, and turned toward the east tower door. I came down to meet them in the ground floor passage that led to the wolf pens. My lord, Marin's bow was correct. This is the border woman. I have told her what the situation is. I have also told her that 3 of my healers have been sent out injured in the last week, and that if she goes in there without preparation and without my guidance, I cannot be responsible for what happens. I looked at Senna. She was younger than I had thought from the window, perhaps 28, perhaps 30, with dark eyes that were doing what observant eyes do in an unfamiliar place, which is take quiet inventory without appearing to. She looked at me, at Marin, at the iron door at the end of the passage. "May I see him?" she asked. Her voice was even, low. "Through the bars first," Marin said. "We observe and then we discuss approach." Senna looked at the bars, looked at the door, and said mildly, "I would rather go in." Marin drew herself up again. "There is a wolf in that pen that has put 3 trained healers into the medical wing. You are a border herbalist with no pack standing. You will observe through the bars first, or you will not observe at all." Senna was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me. I realized I had been watching her since she arrived and had not said anything. "What do you need?" I asked. She considered this with the same mild steadiness. "To go in," she said again, "and for everyone to wait outside." Marin made a sound. I held up a hand to quiet it. I had no good reason to agree. Every practical argument was on Marin's side. But Aldreth had cried out again that morning, a sound I will carry to the end of my days, and I had already tried everything Marin's side of the argument had to offer. "All right," I said. The look Marin gave me could have stripped bark from a tree. I unbarred the pen door myself. Senna unslung her satchel, set it against the wall, and went in with nothing but her hands and the worn cloak. I have asked myself in the weeks since what I expected to happen. The honest answer is that I expected very little: a few minutes of tense standoff, then the retreat the other 3 had made, and then the difficult conversation with myself about what I owed an animal I had loved for 30 years and what love could honestly ask of him. I expected to feel, for perhaps the 100th time that month, the particular grief of a man who has run out of roads. What I did not expect was silence. Aldreth charged the moment the door opened. I was at the bars with my hands wrapped around the iron before the thought to move had finished forming, because 30 years of bond memory does not wait for conscious decision. Every muscle in my body had already responded before my mind caught up. Marin was behind me. I heard her sharp breath. And then Senna said something. I don't know what it was. It was not loud. It was not any word in a language I recognized, though it carried the shape of a word, short, low, a sound like a stone settling into water. She said it once and Aldreth stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. In mid-stride, 3 feet from her, with enough momentum to have put her through the wall if it had continued. He stopped, and his great head swung toward her, and the bright mad light in his eyes, the fever light, the wrong light that had been in them for weeks, flickered. She did not step back. She did not move at all. Aldreth took one more step, then another. The steps were careful. The steps were the steps of an animal trying to remember something it had nearly forgotten. He put his nose to her outstretched hand. She had not reached for him. I saw that clearly. She had simply held her hand where it was, open, palm up, the way you hold something you are not trying to keep, and breathed. He breathed. And then he laid his head in her hands, all the enormous, silver-furred weight of it, and the sound that came out of him was not the sound of a mad or fevered animal. It was the sound of something that has been in pain for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been met where it was. I became aware of several things in rapid succession. The first was that my grip on the bars had gone so tight the iron had left its mark on my palms. The second was that Marin had gone absolutely still beside me. The third was the burning on my wrist. It started low, a warmth, like a door opening somewhere in a room I had not known existed, a room that had been sealed for so long I had stopped thinking about what might be behind it. I had been told about the mate bond, obviously. Every pack-born child is told, in one way or another, told about the mark that can flare, about the warmth, about the recognition that arrives not in the mind first but in the body, as something that was missing being found. I had thought I understood what I was being told. I had not understood at all. The mark on my wrist, below my left hand, the wolf's head mark that every alpha king of Ironmere carries from birth, which had been dark and quiet since the day I was born, was blazing. Gold, vivid, warm, certain gold, the color of the bond made visible, and it was blazing. I looked up from my wrist. Through the bars, Senna was still bent over Aldrath, her hands moving slowly in the thick silver fur at his neck, her head bowed and her lips moving in something too low to hear. She had not looked at me. She had not looked at anything but the wolf in her hands. But her wrist, her left wrist, where the sleeve of her mended cloak had fallen back as she reached into the fur, was glowing with the same light. I stood at those bars for a long time. Behind me, Marin said nothing. She had seen it. Everyone in that passage had seen it. I did not go in immediately. I want to be honest about that. I stood at the bars while Senna worked, watching her move her hands along Aldrath's flank, finding the infected wound with the kind of careful certainty that comes from knowing what you are looking for and not being afraid of what you will find. She cleaned it. She had nothing to clean it with except what she carried in her hands, warmth, steadiness, a murmured word now and then, and the fever began to come down in a way that 3 weeks of medicines and poultices had not managed in an hour. I watched the bright wrongness leave Aldrath's eyes degree by degree. I watched the rigid anguish go out of his shoulders. I watched him settle slowly, from the frantic pacing of a creature in agony into the slow, deep breathing of an animal that is finally sleeping. He slept. Standing up, his great head still in her hands, eyes closed, breathing slowly, Senna held him. There was a sound from somewhere down the passage, one of the younger healers, I think, who had come to stand at the far end to see what was happening. I don't know what the sound was exactly, a kind of exhaled amazement. I heard Marin draw a breath that was not quite steady. I unbarred the pen door and went in. Senna looked up when she heard my step. Her face was composed, unhurried, the face of someone who has been doing exactly what they came to do and is simply not finished yet. There was something on her wrist. I could see it clearly now from inside the pen, the answering mark, mirror to mine, still glowing softly where my own was blazing. She looked at it as I looked at mine, and then she looked at me, and neither of us said anything for a moment. "He'll sleep for several hours," she said. "The fever will break by morning if he's kept warm and not disturbed. The wound will need watching. It went deep, but it's clean now. He's past the worst of it." My voice, when I found it, was not entirely steady. "What did you say to him when you first came in?" A pause. She thought about it with the same seriousness she seemed to bring to everything. "I told him I knew it hurt," she said, "and that he didn't have to hold it alone anymore." I stood in Aldrath's pen, in the straw and the lantern light, and looked at a woman I had known for less than 2 hours, whose wrist was glowing with the mark of a bond I had stopped believing would ever come to me, and felt something shift in my chest that I had no language for. It was not the bond itself, or not only the bond. The bond was unmistakable, yes, the warmth of it, the recognition, the certainty that a missing thing had been found. But it was also this, the way she had spoken to a creature in agony, not with medicine or command, but with the simple truth that pain did not have to be carried alone. I had known that truth in the abstract. I had perhaps forgotten it in the particular, in the long cold years since I had been given grief to carry, and had carried it the only way I knew, which was silently and without putting it down. The door that had opened in my chest at the sight of her mark was letting in air I had not breathed in a very long time. I stepped back to give her room to finish. She did not need to be managed. She was already done with the managing. She was simply waiting for the wolf to settle into a deeper sleep before she moved her hands away. I waited with her. Outside the pen, I could hear the passage, the healers, Marin, Oswin, who had apparently appeared at some point, perhaps more of the council. I could hear, in the particular quality of their silence, that everyone who was there had seen the marks. Let them see. When Senna finally eased her hands free, Aldrath did not stir. She straightened up slowly, the way a person straightens who has been bent over careful work for a long time, and rolled her sleeve back down over her wrist. She looked at the wolf for a moment, this great silver animal who had not slept in days, sleeping now with his massive sides rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep peace, and the expression on her face was not pride. It was something quieter. It was the expression of someone who simply wanted the animal to be well, and was glad. "He'll need someone to check the wound at dawn," she said. "I can show whoever you have what to look for." "You will be here at dawn," I said. It was not a question, but it was not a command either. I said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. She looked at me. I wasn't certain I was invited to stay. "You are." We walked out of the pen together. I barred the door behind us and turned to face the passage. Marin stood closest, her arms folded, her expression the complicated one of a woman who has been proven wrong about something, and is too honest to pretend otherwise, but not yet ready to say so out loud. Behind her were 4 of the younger healers and Oswin. And beyond them, in the passage doorway, 3 members of my council who had evidently come down to see for themselves what the noise from the wolf pen had been about, and had arrived in time to see the marks blazing on both wrists through the bars. Elder Corvath was one of them. He was the oldest member of my council and its most senior voice, a man of considered opinions who had, in the course of the last 3 weeks, suggested twice and very carefully that there might be a mercy in the matter of Aldrath that I was refusing to consider. He looked at Senna. He looked at her wrist. He looked at mine. His expression was not hostile. It was careful, which in Corvath was not so different from kind. "The wolf is better," I said. I said it plainly, without preamble, because that was the only fact that mattered. "We saw," Corvath said. "We also saw," said the second council elder, a younger man named Brecken, who did not yet have Corvath's patience for plainness, "that the border woman carries a mark." "As do I said. Brecken's jaw worked slightly. He was calculating. I could see him calculating what this meant for the council's standing, for the question of my succession, for the political geometry of having a wolfless-born woman as the Alpha King's fated mate. He was not a bad man, Brecken. He was a man whose mind moved in grooves of concern that were not always large enough for unexpected things. "My lord," Marin said. She had uncrossed her arms. Her tone was not what it had been in the courtyard when Senna arrived, stripped of its dismissal at least, stripped down to the honest core. "The wolf is better. Whatever she did, he is better. I can see that." "Yes," I said. "The matter of the mark is not a matter for tonight," I said. "Tonight, the wolf is resting. Tomorrow we will discuss whatever needs discussing. What will happen now is this. A room will be prepared for our guest in the East Wing, a proper room, not a servant's pallet. She will be brought supper and whatever she requires for the night. She will be treated as any person of standing I have invited under my roof." I felt Senna, standing slightly behind my shoulder, go very still. Not a surprised still, a careful still, as if she were trying to take in a thing she had not expected and was deciding how much weight to give it. Marin nodded. It was a small nod, but it was honest. She turned to one of the younger healers and said something quiet that resulted in a flurry of movement back toward the main hall. Brecken said nothing more. He looked at Senna for a moment, not rudely, but with the particular expression of a man updating his understanding of a situation in real time, and then he turned and followed Marin. Corvath remained a moment longer. He looked at me, and then at Senna, and then back at me and said simply, "Good." He left. I turned to Senna. She was watching the empty doorway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "Come, I'll show you to the hall." She had a way of moving through an unfamiliar space that I noticed as we walked, not timid, not performing ease, simply present, taking it in the way she had taken in the courtyard, and the passage and the wolf pen, with the same quiet inventory of a person who has learned to be accurate about what is around them. She looked at the stone walls, the tapestries, the high windows showing the dark ridge. She did not remark on any of it. "You've not been to a citadel like this before?" I asked. "Once," she said, "a pack lord's hold in the lowlands when I was young. They wanted me to look at a wolf that was lame. They were less," she paused, selecting the word with care, "less settled about it when I came." "What happened?" "The wolf walked," she said, "but I left before morning." I did not press the rest of it. I thought I understood the shape. We reached the great hall. The long tables were mostly empty at this hour, the hearth fire banked down but still warm. Oswin had anticipated me. As Oswin generally did, a place had been set at the far end of the high table, not at the servant's bench. Bread, hard cheese, a covered pot that smelled of the kitchen's good broth, a cup of the hall's wine. Senna stopped when she saw it. That's as she stopped. "The seat is not taken," I said. "Sit, please." She sat and she ate, and I sat also, not at the other end of the table but a chair away, because the distance at the other end of a long table is a message and I did not want to send it. I poured her wine myself, which I could tell from the brief stillness in her expression was not what she had expected. We talked, or rather I asked and she answered, and her answers were the kind that leave you wanting the next one. She had grown up in the border settlements, the daughter of a woman who kept the village's animals and who had the same gift Senna had for the ones that were beyond ordinary help. Her mother had called it nothing in particular, simply a way of listening that most people had but most people forgot. She had traveled since she was 19, wherever the accounts took her, wherever someone had run out of other answers. She did not belong to a pack, she said, without any particular sadness in saying it, the way you might describe a geographical fact. She told me about a wolf she had found on the road between two border settlements, 2 winters back, so sick and so frightened of people that it had taken her 3 days camped in the same field before it would let her close enough to look at the wound. She had not gone back to the settlement in those 3 days. She had simply stayed. She told it without self-congratulation, the way people tell the simple facts of how they spend their time. "Has it been lonely?" I asked. She thought about this with the same seriousness she gave everything. "It has been useful," she said finally, and then after a moment, "Yes, some days." I thought about the 3 weeks of watching Aldreth suffer through the bars of his pen. I thought about the years before that, the years since the grief had come, the long quiet of a hold that has a king in it but is waiting for something it cannot quite name. "Yes," I said, "some days." She looked at me. I had not meant to say that. Not tonight, not yet, not to someone I had known for a matter of hours whose wrist was still faintly warm with the light of a mark she had not asked for. But she looked at me as if the thing I had said was not a mistake, as if it were simply true, and she was glad it had been said. I showed her to the East Wing room myself, Oswin trailing at a diplomatic distance behind. The room was one of the better guest rooms, a fireplace, a proper bed, the window looking out over the ridge and the dark spread of the wolf run below. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. "The wolf run," she said. "He'll be able to smell the cold air from here. That's good. It's good for them, the cold air, when they're healing. It clears the head." She was talking about Aldreth, not herself. She was looking at the wolf run below and thinking about whether the air from the window would help him. The door that had opened in my chest settled on its hinges and became something solid. Not a moment's warmth. A room. A real room with air in it and light. "Sleep well," I said. She turned and looked at me, just for a moment, just that quiet inventory, and said, "You too." I doubted I would. I was right. I sat in the passage outside the wolf pen through most of the night, listening to Aldreth breathe. He was sleeping still, the deep breathing of a fever breaking, and every half hour I put my hand on the bars and listened and was grateful. Once, near the small hours, I heard him shift in the straw and make a low sound, not the anguished cry, nothing like that, simply the sound of a sleeping animal finding a more comfortable position. And I sat for a long time with my hand flat against the cold iron, feeling the mark on my wrist, thinking about a woman who had told a maddened wolf that it didn't have to hold its pain alone. I had been holding mine for a long time. I was still sitting there when she found me in the morning. She came down before dawn, while the citadel was still in the gray half-light between night and day, wearing her travel clothes and carrying the satchel. She stopped when she saw me in the passage, and she looked at the pen door, and then she looked at me, and she did not make any remarks about the cold or the hour or the fact that an alpha king was sitting on the stone floor outside his wolf's pen with his back against the wall and his cloak around his shoulders. She simply sat down on the floor beside me, not close, not far, and listened to Aldreth breathe. "He's slower than he was," she said. "Good slower." "Yes, good slower." She was quiet for a moment. "His shoulder will still need attention. The wound itself is clean now, but there's something deeper in it. I'd like to look again in the daylight." "As long as you need," I said. She nodded. We sat in the gray passage, 2 feet apart on the cold stone, listening to the slow breathing of a wolf that had come back from somewhere very far away, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the silence was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Marin came in an hour later, with 2 of the younger healers and a lamp. She stopped when she saw us both on the floor. There was a long moment in which the complicated arithmetic of her expression was very visible, the professional assessment of the wolf's breathing good. Relief passed across her face like a hand moving over water. The assessment of me, the alpha king on the passage floor. She tucked this away without comment, being Marin, and the assessment of Senna, something shifting. The stiffness from the courtyard the evening before rearranging itself into something else, less certain, less decided. "The fever has broken," Marin said. It was not exactly a question. "By the sound of him," Senna said. "I'd like to go in and check the wound." Marin looked at me. I nodded. Marin looked back at Senna for a moment, then said, more quietly than anything she had said the night before, "I'll come in with you, if you'll have me." Senna looked at her. "Yes," she said, "I'd appreciate that." I unbarred the door. The next several hours were a kind of working peace I had not expected to witness in that pen. Marin was a skilled healer, 30 years of skill, none of it wasted, and Senna had something that Marin did not have but recognized, I thought, the way a musician recognizes a different kind of musician. Not competition, simply the acknowledgement of a different instrument playing in the same key. They worked side by side, Marin checking the wound's physical progress with the sharp clinical efficiency that was her gift, Senna moving her hands in the ways that were hers, murmuring the sounds that were hers, and Aldreth lay between them and bore it all with a patience that 3 weeks ago would have been unthinkable. Near mid-morning, when Marin had rewrapped the shoulder and was gathering her things, she paused with her back still to us and said, without particular inflection, "The wolf would not have survived another week of this. I want to say that plainly. Whatever was done last night, it was necessary and it was done." She walked out without waiting for an answer. Senna watched her go. "That's a woman who doesn't like being wrong," she said. "No," I agreed. "But she doesn't hide it when she is. That is rarer." Senna considered this. "Yes," she said, "that is rarer." The council met at midday. as councils do when something has happened that requires formal acknowledgement. I had expected the meeting. I had not been looking forward to it, but I had not been dreading it either, because I knew exactly what I intended to say, and the only question was how long it would take for the room to arrive at the same understanding. It took the better part of 2 hours. Brecken led, as Brecken generally did in matters where he felt the council's authority was the relevant concern. He was not unkind about it, to his credit. He was never cruel, Brecken, only anxious, but he was thorough. He raised the question of pack standing, which was a real question. He raised the question of precedent. He raised the question of what the packs allied to Ironmere would say about a wolfless-born mate for their alpha king. He raised, with careful delicacy, the question of whether the mark that both I and the border woman were showing could be. He searched for the word, uncertain, in some way unclear. I let him finish. The mark is not uncertain, I said. I have carried it since birth, and so it appears has she. That is the whole of it. The bond is what it is, it does not consult the council. Brecken opened his mouth. I am not asking for permission, I said. I am informing you, as is my practice with things that affect Ironmere, so that you are not surprised by what comes next. What comes next is this. The woman who is my fated mate is a guest in this hold, and she will be treated as such for as long as she chooses to stay. The question of what she chooses, the bond, the mark, the rest of it, is hers to answer in her own time. I will not rush it, and neither will this council. Brecken looked at the table. He looked at Corvath. He looked at the third elder, a steady, quiet woman named Hava who had said nothing yet, and who, I knew, had been watching everything with the particular patience of a person who forms her opinions slowly and then holds them without any visible uncertainty. Hava met his eye and said nothing, which was its own answer. The pack stability, Brecken said finally, less insistently than before. That is all I am thinking of. I know, I said, and Aldrath is well. The wolf is resting. The pack has seen it, and they understand what they saw. Their stability, as you put it, is not in danger from a woman who spent her first night in this hold sitting on a cold floor with her hands in a dying wolf's fur. Brecken was quiet for a moment. I watched him work through this, the practicality of it, the optics of it, the simple truth of it, and come to rest somewhere more measured than where he had started. Corvath said, from the far end of the table, "That seems exactly right to me." There was a pause. Brecken subsided into the particular silence of a man choosing his battles, which is the closest Brecken generally came to agreement. I went back to Senna. She was in the wolf pen when I found her, as I had half expected. She was not working. Aldrath was sleeping again, the good healing sleep, his great head on his paws, the rattling wrongness gone entirely from his breathing. She was sitting on the pen floor beside him with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, and she was reading something from a small worn book she had taken from her satchel. She looked up when I came in. "The council," she said. "Managed," I said. She looked back at the book. I heard raised voices. "Brecken is thorough," I said. "It takes a while." She almost smiled. It was a very near thing, the corner of her mouth, the small suggestion of warmth, and then it became something more considered, and she set the book down in her lap. "I've been thinking," she said. I sat down on the pen floor across from her, because the floor had apparently become the place where I had the most honest conversations, and I saw no reason to change the venue. "Tell me." "I've been thinking about the mark," she said, "about what it means and what I want to say about it." She paused, looking at her wrist, which was no longer glowing but which showed, even in the ordinary daylight, the outline of the mark as if it had always been there. "I've known about the bond since I was a child. My mother talked about it the way you talk about something you believe in without expecting it to happen to you. I never expected it to happen to me. I'm wolfless. I've always been outside the formal part of all of it." She stopped. I waited. "What I'm trying to say," she said carefully, "is that I don't want you to feel obligated. Because of last night, or because of Aldrath, or because the mark simply, she gestured toward both their wrists. I am glad he's better. I am very glad. And I don't want you to think that because I have a mark on my wrist I expect something of you. I had been listening to her the way I had been listening to everything she said since she arrived, with the particular attention of a man who has been waiting a long time for someone to say a thing, and is not sure he will believe it when it comes. "What do you expect?" I asked. She thought about it. "For the wolf to keep getting better," she said, and another pause, "to be asked, if when you decide what you want." "I'd like to be asked." "Asked," I repeated. "Not told," she said, "asked." There was something very quiet in the wolf pen just then, with Aldrath breathing between us and the ridge light coming through the high window and the mark on both our wrists. "Then I'm asking," I said, "stay." She looked at me, the quiet inventory, "For how long?" "For as long as you like," I said. "Past that we can discuss it." She considered this for a long moment, the same long and serious consideration she brought to everything, and then she said, "All right, yes, I'll stay." I let out a breath I had not been entirely aware I was holding. We sat in the pen for a while longer, both of us with our backs to the wall and the sleeping wolf between us, not talking, simply present in the same space. It was strange, perhaps, to someone who had not seen the way the previous days had unfolded, but it was not strange to me. It felt, oddly, like the most natural thing that had happened in Ironmere in a very long time. This particular quiet, this particular easy presence that did not demand anything of the air around it, that did not require to be managed or explained. The days that followed had their own shape. Senna spent most of her time in and around the wolf pen, working with Marin in the mornings on Aldrath's wound, which healed with a steadiness that Marin described once as almost impatient, as if the animal's body were trying to get back to a state it recognized. She spent the afternoons in whatever part of the citadel she chose to be in, the herbery, when Marin's assistant showed her where it was. The great library one afternoon, where I found her standing in front of the shelves with an expression of undisguised happiness that made something warm and ordinary happen in my chest. The wolf run below the east tower on a morning when the snow had come in overnight, and Aldrath was well enough to be allowed out into it, and she stood at the fence watching him move through the white field with his great silver head raised, and the fever gone entirely from his eyes, and her own expression was the one I had seen the first night. Not pride, not ownership, simply gladness. The pack watched her. Packs always watch, and Ironmere's pack was no different in that way. But the watching shifted, across those days, from the particular watchfulness of a group of people trying to decide what to make of an unexpected arrival to something else, something slower, more at rest. The younger healers had seen what happened with Aldrath. Word spread, as word does. The stable hand who had been having trouble with a skittish horse asked, diffidently, if she might look at it. She looked at it for 20 minutes and came back to tell him that it had a sore in its left back hoof and to show him how to find it, and the horse stood quietly for the whole of the examination. The stable hand mentioned this to his brother. His brother mentioned it to his wife, who was one of the eastern courtyard guards. The guard mentioned it to her fellow, and so it went. She did not notice, or she noticed and simply found it uninteresting, which amounted to the same thing. She was not performing anything. She was simply there, doing what she did, being what she was, and Ironmere was quietly adjusting itself around her the way water adjusts around a stone, not fighting the shape, simply finding its new course. Brecken remained cautious. He was working his way towards something, I could see it, turning the situation over in his private thoughts the way a man turns over a problem he is not ready to solve. He was not hostile. Brecken was not hostile to things, as a general rule, only anxious until he understood them. He would arrive, eventually, at understanding. I gave him space to do it. Marin arrived faster. It happened one evening, a week after Senna's first night in the pen, when I was coming down the east passage and heard the two of them in the herbery talking. Not talking in the way that people talk who are being careful with each other, but talking in the easy shorthand of two people who have found a professional language they share. Marin was saying something about a wolf she had treated in the autumn with a joint problem, describing the case, and Senna was asking questions with the kind of interest that is not polite but genuine. I stood in the passage and listened for a moment, and then I walked on, because some things did not need the presence of a king. On the 10th day, Aldreth walked out of the pen on his own for the first time. I was watching from the doorway when it happened. Senna had suggested that morning that we leave the pen door open and let him choose, rather than leading him, and Marin had agreed, and I had agreed, and so we had all stood at a distance and waited. He stood at the pen door for a long time, his great head moving slowly from side to side, testing the air. Then he stepped out. He walked across the passage floor. He walked to the outer door that led to the wolf run, which Senna had also suggested be left open. He walked through it, into the cold snowlight, and he stopped in the middle of the run and stood with his head up and his eyes clear, fully clear, the fever light entirely gone and breathed. Then he turned and looked back at Senna, who was standing in the doorway. He walked back to her. He put his head against her hand. There are moments that are not about what they appear to be about on their surface, and this was one of them. On its surface, it was a wolf recovering from a wound walking back to the healer who had helped him. But below that surface, it was something older and more particular. The bond made visible through the animal, the thread between two people demonstrated by the creature that had always known what they were still learning. I looked at my wrist. The mark was warm, not blazing as it had been that first night, but steadily, quietly warm, the way a hearth fire is warm when it has burned down to coals, not the crisis light of the first night, but something more settled, something that had decided to stay. I looked at Senna. She was looking at me, over Aldreth's great silver head. "Come for a walk with me," I said. It was not planned. It was simply what wanted to be said. She looked at me for a moment, the inventory, the consideration. Then, all right. We walked the ridge. It was the kind of northern winter afternoon that is brief and brilliant, the snow on the ridge path crisp and still, the sky a pale hard blue with the sun low over the western peaks, the whole landscape very clear and very cold. Senna walked beside me with her cloak drawn and her breath making small clouds in the air, and I told her, because the day seemed to call for honesty, and I had been trying to be honest since she arrived, something I had not told anyone. I told her about my wife, who had died 3 years past of a winter fever that moved too fast for the healers to follow. I told her about the grief, which had not been dramatic, had not been the kind of grief that breaks things and announces itself, but had been very long and very quiet, and had taken things out of the world that I had not known how to replace. I told her that I had stopped expecting the mate bond, not because I had stopped believing in it exactly, but because the expectation had seemed like a thing that belonged to a different version of myself, an earlier one, the one before the grief. She listened to all of it. She did not offer me anything except her attention, which was complete and which did not waver, and there was something in the quality of that listening. The way she did not rush to fill the spaces, did not hurry me toward a resolution or offer a consolation she did not mean. That was its own kind of gift. I had told the fact of my grief to several people over the years, because some facts cannot be avoided if you are a king, and people need to understand why a chair is empty and a place at the table unset. But I had not told the inside of it to anyone. I was surprised, walking the ridge with the snow and the cold sky and the western peaks turning rose at their edges, to find that I was telling it now. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The wolf's name is Aldreth. I've been calling him that in my head. I hope that's right." It took me a moment to follow the turn. "It is," I said. "It's the name given by my grandfather." "It's a good name," she said. "It means something, doesn't it, in the old language?" "Something like the one that remains," I said. She thought about this. "Yes," she said, "that's right for him." We walked to the far end of the ridge, where the path turned and the citadel was visible below, the gray stone of it, the eastern tower, the wolf run where Aldrath was, no doubt, doing whatever Aldrath did on afternoons when he felt well enough to do something. We stood at the ridge's edge and looked down. "My mother died when I was 22, Senna said. She said it to the view, not to me, which was the way of saying something you are not rehearsing. She didn't leave slowly. She was there and then she wasn't, and the thing about that kind of loss, the fast kind, is that you spend a long time afterward expecting the person to come around a corner. You know they won't. You know, but the expecting doesn't consult the knowing." "No," I said, "it doesn't." She turned her head and looked at me, and we were standing close enough now, not planned, just the narrowness of the ridge path, that I could see the exact dark color of her eyes, which were the color of deep water over river stones. "I think," she said, "that the reason I am good at what I do is that I am not afraid of things that are in pain. Most people are, a little. The pain makes them pull back before they've done what they came to do. But I learned with my mother, with the animals, with all of it, that the pain is just a room you have to go into. You can't help anything from the doorway." I looked at her. My mark was warm on my wrist. The ridge was very quiet, the snow unbroken around us. "You walked into the pen without asking what was in it," I said. "I knew what was in it," she said. "A wolf in pain, that's all it was." "And me," I said, "at the bars." She looked at me for a long moment. "You too," she said. "At the bars." We walked back down the ridge as the sun went behind the western peaks and the afternoon light turned cold and golden, and when we came through the citadel gate, there was a moment, just a moment, at the threshold where the gate stone and the courtyard flags met, where she stumbled slightly on the seam of stone, and I put a hand on her arm, and she did not pull away, and we continued into the courtyard with my hand still on her arm, and it was the simplest thing, and it was not simple at all. Oswin saw this from across the courtyard, and found something extremely important to look at in the other direction. That evening at supper, Brecken arrived at whatever he had been working toward. He came to the high table after the meal, when the hall was thinning out, and he stood before Senna with the careful expression of a man who has decided to say something he is not certain about, and is going to say it anyway. "I owe you a different welcome than you received," he said. He stopped. "I was cautious when I should have been simply honest. The wolf is well, and I can see what the mark means. I don't always arrive quickly at things, but I do arrive." Senna looked at him. "Thank you," she said simply. Brecken nodded once, the nod of a man whose inner arithmetic had finally balanced, and went back to his seat. I watched her watch him go. "He means it," I said. "I know," she said. "I can hear when people mean things." I believed this absolutely. The formal matter of the mark was not resolved in a single evening or even in a week. These things have their own pace, and I had meant what I said to her on the pen floor. I would not rush it, and neither would she. But the days had their warmth in them and their direction. She stayed through the first week and the second. Aldrath grew stronger. He began to follow her through the citadel in the way of an animal that has decided something and is comfortable with his decision, which is to say absolutely and without embarrassment. The pack watched this and arrived at their own understandings in their own time. On a morning perhaps 3 weeks after her arrival, Marin came to me in my study. She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment in the way of someone who has organized what they want to say and is making sure it comes out in the right order. "She's done something in my herbary," Marin said. I looked up. "She's reorganized the poultice stores," Marin said, "in a way that is technically incorrect by the system I've used for 20 years, and also," she paused, with the expression of a woman fighting herself, "also considerably more logical." I said nothing, waiting. "She also found the source of the damp smell we've had in the east wall corner for 6 months, Marin said, "which turns out to be a blocked channel in the outer stonework, and she went and told the mason about it before mentioning it to me. The mason has apparently fixed it. The smell is gone. Another pause. She asked if she could plant a few things along the south-facing outer wall. Herbs she uses. I told her yes. Thank you for telling me, I said. Marin looked at me steadily for a moment. I am telling you, she said, with the particular plainness of Marin at her most honest, because I want you to know that I understand now what I did not understand the evening she arrived, and that I won't make the same classification of error twice. She left. I sat with that for a while. The morning she asked to see the old pack records was the morning I knew she was not thinking of the border settlements anymore. It was a simple request. She had been reading in the library, found a reference to a historical case of wolf fever in the records of Ironmere's second Alpha King, 3 centuries back, and wanted to find the original notation. I showed her where the archive was kept. She spent the better part of a day in there, with Oswin's careful assistance and a lamp, and a notebook she had pulled from her satchel, making precise small notes in the margins of the notebook in a hand that was very small and very clear. When she came out in the late afternoon, dusty from the archive, and carrying the notebook and looking pleased with herself, in the particular way of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for, I was waiting in the passage with 2 cups of the kitchen's best tea, and absolutely no reason to have been waiting there that I could have named precisely. She accepted the cup. She leaned against the passage wall and told me what she had found, the historical case, what had been done for that wolf 3 centuries ago, the connection to what she had done for Aldrath, the thread she had been trying to trace. She talked about it with the animated certainty of a person who is good at something and knows it, and does not perform the knowledge but simply has it. I listened to all of it. I thought, not for the first time, that I had not listened to someone talk like this, with this particular pleasure, this ease, for a very long time, and that the room in my chest had a good deal more air in it than it had had a month ago. "Will you stay?" I said when she had finished. She looked at me, not the first night inventory, something different now, something that had had 3 weeks to become itself. "You keep asking that," she said. "I keep meaning it," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked at the passage, the stone walls of the citadel, the lamp on its hook, the direction of the wolf run below. She looked at all of it in a way that was different from how she had looked at the courtyard that first evening, not taking inventory, not filing unfamiliarity, simply looking at it, the way you look at a place when you are starting to know it. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." It was done the way things are done at Ironmere, simply, concretely, with witnesses. In the great hall, at the long table, with the council present and Marin and Oswin and the pack gathered, I stood before her and showed the mark on my wrist and said that it was hers, as it had been since the beginning, and that I offered it not as a command or a claim but as what it was, the bond made visible, in the hope that she would take it freely. She had worn her own cloak to the hall, the old brown traveling one, the one mended so many times it had stopped being any particular shape and become simply itself. She had not asked for different clothes, and I had not suggested it, because the cloak was hers, and she was what she was, a border woman who had come through a citadel gate on a dun horse with a satchel on her back and had done, with no particular fanfare, the thing that no one else could do. She stood before the hall in her own cloak, and she was not less for it. She was exactly herself, which was the thing the bond had always known, and which the hall was only now learning to read. She took it freely. She held out her wrist beside mine, and the marks blazed together, the matching gold light of them, the certainty that some things in the world simply are and do not require argument, and the great hall of Ironmere went silent in the particular way of a space in which something enormous has just been made real. Marin was the first to bow. She did it with great efficiency, the bow of a woman who has made a decision and is implementing it without fuss. Corveth followed, Brecken a step behind, and then the hall in the way that halls do when the understanding is general. Aldrath was there, because Aldrath had taken to going where Senna went, and he was standing at the edge of the gathering. He lifted his great head when the hall went quiet, and he looked at her. And then, in the slow and deliberate way of an animal for whom every action is meaningful, he lay down. He put his head on his paws and rested. I had seen Aldrath perform many things in 30 years. I had never seen him rest in a full hall. He was at rest now, completely, profoundly at rest. The long silver weight of him settled into the stone floor as if he had simply decided that this was where safety was, and there was no argument available against it. Senna looked at him for a moment. Then she took my hand. It was not a grand gesture. It was a hand, taking another hand, in a hall that had gone quiet with the weight of a thing finally being what it had always been. Her fingers were warm. The mark on her wrist blazed against mine, and then settled to the same slow warmth it had become over the weeks, the hearth-fire warmth, the warmth of something that has come to stay. She turned and looked out at the hall, at the bowed heads, at Marin's efficient reverence, at Corvath's calm, at Brecken's resolved expression, at the rows of packed faces wearing the look of people who have watched something they did not expect become something they cannot now imagine the Citadel without. She did not say anything, she didn't need to, but her hand stayed in mine. I thought about what she had told me on the ridge, that most people are afraid of things in pain and pull back from them before the work is done, that the pain is just a room, that you cannot help anything from the doorway. She had not come in from the doorway. She had not come in from the doorway from the first moment, had simply walked through the open door and been present, and it had taken a maddened wolf and 3 weeks and one honest conversation on a cold ridge for me to understand that this was what she had been doing all along, not performing courage, simply not stopping. I looked at the mark on our joined wrists, blazing and then settling, blazing and then settling, the rhythm of a thing that has found its rest. Aldrath breathed. The hall breathed. And the name she had said to him that first night, the one low word in the language I did not know, the word like a stone settling into water, I had asked her later what it meant. She had thought about it, the same long consideration. It means, she had paused, roughly, it means the room is here, come inside. I had never told her that this was exactly what she had done for me as well. Standing in that hall, her hand in mine and Aldrath at rest at our feet and the whole of Ironmere quiet around us, I decided that I would. Not then, not in the hall, there was time, and we were people who understood the value of saying a thing when the moment was ready, not before. But I would tell her. The room is here, come inside. The door had been open a long time. I simply had not known until she walked through it what the room was for.